Well, I saw that you were following me on Instagram, and I haven't really been all that tuned into social media, but all of a sudden it's like I've come out of a trance. And I need to talk to other people, because this is a researcher.
Yep.
And a clinician. You're not like necessarily talking with your professionals and community, Yeah. And it's like, hello.
Instagram's fun. But I mean, I think also like on a bigger scale, what we were talking about, last time we talked is like, what I saw was the researchers are doing amazing work. People just don't know what the heck they're doing. And that's the communication piece. Therefore, like the podcast, the book, all that stuff. Because I actually was a MD, PhD dropout. I kept the MD. I hated microscopes. And I was like, I get the research. I like reading the research. I don't like I like the ideas, but like the doing and the writing and the grants and like, no way. But like, I know the language and the people enough that it's very easy for me.
Your book translates all of this stuff in such a way it becomes very accessible.
Yes. Yeah.
Very accessible.
It's
and
easy
that
to read.
To me, it's easy to read, and it's so digestible for the layperson.
Yep.
And I mean, I loved your chapter on the hormone stuff and the neurotransmitters, because it's like you made it so concise and so accessible.
Yeah. And I think it can be, but I think it takes a certain skill to like be able to read that stuff and to be able to digest it down to be like, of course this is the way you behave, because just understand dopamine briefly and then it makes sense, right? Like for people really want to understand their bodies. They want to understand why they work the way they do, and they're curious about it.
And because of all the work you've done as a physician and a surgeon, and then your education about sexual medicine that you undertook, you understand it, so you get it not only straight, but you bring your expertise to it as well.
Yeah, you probably get this too. It's like you forget that people don't know this stuff because it's your day, every day, right? And you're like, how do people still not understand that like vaginal estrogen is safe and fantastic, right? But it's like you do that 40 plus hours a week. You forget other people don't know it, but they don't. But that's why Instagram's useful, because you'll realize what people know on Instagram, and it's not much.
And what's really great about what you're doing is that you cut through, I mean, what people get on social media in general, there's so much out there, and so much of that information is not accurate. And even when journalists, have written about my work and other people's work, they don't really get it. It doesn't sometimes, and they don't even bother sometimes to fact check unless they're like a science journalist. So the ideas that are out there are really, it's hard for people to sift through and get really good information.
Yeah. And like, then you get the marketers and people just wanting to sell you stuff. And like, you got to sift through all of that. Like, is this real? Is this supplement, this hot supplement of 2022? Is that the newfound thing? Like, where do people go for that information, right?
Absolutely. And a lot of times people are looking for the quick fixes and the pills and the medications, when a lot of it, as you've written about, is lifestyle changes too, and changes in our perspectives. Like, we're not broken. Hello, we're not broken.
Totally. And that we're the one who is supposed to figure it out for us. We're just looking for the guru. We're looking for the supplement. We're looking for, the one piece of something. And it's like, it's within you to figure it out. And that's, again, it's that mental change.
The quote that I saw in your book that I put out onto Instagram because it just blew me away, about the patriarchy and that we as women aren't really supposed to desire. Mm-hmm. And that we're supposed to be the objects of desire, just kindled something in me, Kelly, because I'm thinking about what we're facing politically. And, the pleasure is a very political thing, that, without having agency about our own bodies, without feeling safe in our own bodies, how are we supposed to be able to access feeling safe? Feeling safe is the most important thing for exploration. and feeling like an equal
100%.
citizen. So this is where I am feeling such a call to action, to be in connection and having these conversations and sort of reorienting women, all of us collectively, to the idea that pleasure is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Men are certainly entitled to their, sexual pleasure. It's expected. So I would love to hear more about you as a urologist and how you kind of got it in your head and made this incredible commitment to educate yourself and therefore being able to educate people, because of the huge gaps in sexual medicine and women's health, period, that we're now starting to become more aware of.
Totally. Well, when you're trained in Western medicine, right? Like, and I put this in the book, but like Western medicine was created by men. Women are really these people who have these extra problems like periods and pregnancies, right? And so like women are, the way I see it now is like women aren't people. Women are these people, like our bodies just do things, right? That men's bodies don't do. So those are like women's issues in air quotes instead of like people's issues, because we're 50% of the people, right? And so you're trained in Western medicine, and there was a professor in medical school, and he said 50% of what you are going to learn here is wrong. We just don't know what 50%. It was like the best thing to like stick onto that thought, right? Because you could really get trained like, this is dogma, this is what we know, this is a fact, but don't forget that some of this is wrong, right? And then I got trained in urology. Urology now, 9% of urologists in America are female. So we have very few women representation because urology was just very male. It was like the male problems, right? It was the male sexual. And in that, you're assuming somebody else is taking care of the female in the assumption that we're only male, right? And we find out gynecologists are busy, man. They're super busy. They're not owning it. And a lot of them will say it. I'm not putting words into their mouth. And so when I was trained in urology, it was like, penis, Viagra, how it works, it's a pump, it's a light switch, it's blah, blah, blah. Women are different, complicated, and we'll never figure them out. It's like basically what I was told. And so I was like, okay, I'll just wait till somebody figures them out. And it just clicked about 3 to 4 years ago now of like, who's helping these people? Who's helping the people who are supposed to be sleeping with the people I'm giving Viagra to? Is like my new tagline. Is like, oh, nobody's helping them. They don't know where to go. They think they're broken. They don't know the basics of you put something in the vagina and you won't have an orgasm 70% of the time. Like 10% of women have never had an orgasm. Like we're so trained to like not be sexually, to enjoy ourselves sexually. We're just here to be desired, right? And in order to be desired, we've got to buy all the products, look good, change our appearance, behave a certain way, right? And so we have to do all this stuff to be desired and not have our own enjoyment to boot.
And we get shamed either way. We get shamed
either way.
Either way. If we're sexual, we get shamed. If we're not particularly feeling desire, and I love what you write about, forget about desire. I don't know if I want to use the F word on your podcast, but it's like,
on my podcast.
Fuck desire. And 90% of the calls that I get as a sex therapist, both from women and men, is that usually the woman has lost active sexual desire in a long-term relationship. And it's like the big thing. The desire is gone and the person feels broken, usually the woman. And if it's the man, then there's the double whammy of shame because men are supposed to always want to jump on something and have sex. So that's the vast majority of, like, the number one reason that people see a sex therapist is loss of desire. They don't understand that there's active desire, receptive desire, and you know what? You don't even need desire to have great sex. Yeah, to have great sex.
Right.
And if we're not balanced in our lives, if we're not enjoying our lives, if we're not turned on by our lives, we're not going to feel turned on even at the thought of having sex, even the desire to have fun. And this is a big issue.
Totally. I think for a lot of women, sex is a chore. Sex is a chore, and now they feel bad because they don't desire the chore that they're doing.
And in heterosexual marriages, when a man whines that he's not getting the sex that he wants and needs, and the wife doesn't desire him like, she used to, that's not sexy. So
I'm so glad I met you.
I can't tell you how excited I am to have conversations with you. It's like kind of like I told you, I feel like I've come out of a trance from being so like I went back to grad school for the doctorate when I was 50. So the past 15 years, I've just been so in this deep dive, learning how to do the brain research, writing up 3 papers, and then actually a 4th paper went in yesterday, because what I'm really hoping to educate people is about how our core emotions work, the wired in emotions. Lust is one of them. And if we aren't feeling safe, if we're constantly stressed out, like you write about in the book, with cortisol all over the place, not only are we not going to have sexual kind of interest, we're going to be like stressed out and miserable and get physically unhealthy too. So this is such a burning issue right now. Between I was looking, with the New York Times talking about, the clitoris, and then the PBS doing that. Why don't we study women's sexual health? Yep. And, even when Nightline came to film my dissertation research, I'm trying to think of her name, Juju Zhang, or the correspondent, started off the conversation asking me, and they came to see me. I didn't look for them. Our readers, our viewers are going to want to know why you're studying sex and not something important like cancer. They didn't put that in the video, but I just like starting off. It's so hard to do sex research. It's so hard. And
you know more than me, but what I see is that you have to leave America and go to Canada if you want to have a decent sex researcher, because Canada seems to like support these people better.
I just heard from Meredith Chivers this morning. She's the one, you're familiar with her work about how the genitalia in women are less specific in responding to sexual stimuli, where for men it's more about their identified sex.
Yeah.
She said that.
Let's break that down for the listeners. So women in these studies, and correct me, but I think people would love this. You put a woman, you give her various erotica videos. She basically gets turned on by like almost everything. And then you put a guy in there, a heterosexual male, and he mostly gets turned on by watching heterosexual porn. Is that oversimplified?
Well, actually, the distinction is her vagina has increased blood flow. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't translate into subjective arousal.
Right. So there's that more like what my pelvis does is that arousal, desire, non-concordance, right? So
exactly.
You're like, I'm not sure that I'm turned on. And the researchers are like, yeah, your vagina is wet.
Your vagina, you got blood flow going to your vagina.
Yeah.
And actually
is saying yes, and your brain is saying, I'm not aware of this. Yeah.
People have had all sorts of theories about why that is. And, evolutionary theories are always interesting because you can't prove them. Yeah, but like, for example, like females of mammalian species and primates don't always get to choose who they have sex with. So one of the theories about that, and it's fascinating, we could talk all day about this, and Meredith knows way more about this than me. The idea is that it's sort of a protective mechanism to kind of protect by creating some blood flow and lubrication to protect the genitalia. The other thing is, I think this is even more salient when I think about it. We as women do not get sort of encouraged to focus on sensations from our genitals. It's not like we're expected to, and because the penis is an outie, it's kind of hard to miss when it gets, erect. But even beyond that, like it's kind of, we're not really supposed to be embodied sexual beings, we're objects.
Yeah.
So
Aren't we also told that any sort of vaginal discharge is disgusting?
Exactly. And a lot of women don't even like their vaginas and their vulvas. But actually, Meredith just sent me off an email that Katie Couric is writing about this now, the importance of pleasure. So I don't know if they're
I
going to
just gave
contact.
Katie Couric my book.
Okay, so she's on it. This is a
I
hot
met her
topic.
2 weeks ago in New York, and I gave her my book. So
This is a hot topic, and
it's a hot topic.
right before COVID shut things down, I was on to the Today Show talking with Maria Shriver and Jessica Shepard, who's a gynecologist, about the importance of pleasure. And that's really the whole point of my book, because when you're not able to have pleasures in and out of the bedroom, it's a real window into how our emotional brains are really not functioning properly. And I think that's really a
100%.
huge problem for us, an epidemic of people not being able to gain pleasures from everyday life, and we're getting hijacked, and we're more hot-tempered. People are hot-tempered, they're afraid, they're reactive. It's kind of like a very interesting time. I guess it's always an interesting
And I
time.
think that it's always interesting, right? I think what's important for people to take away is they're like, okay, so now what? What do I do with that information? And it's like this idea of, the air quotes, regulating your nervous system, of being aware you're in your sympathetic state, that you are having stress, that you are go, go, go. Being able to see it first, right? Because all of us don't know the water we're swimming in. And then being able to say, what works for me? What works for me to calm me down, to get me in the mood? Whether that's yoga or going on a walk or journaling or being alone or taking a bath or whatever. Turn off the phone. Literally turn it off and put it in a drawer. Learning that you have the skills. You don't have to take a pill. You don't have to divorce your husband. You don't have to instead of just trying to quit your job, you can be like, what works for me to change my neural state?
And I think you're absolutely on target there. What do we need to do? What now? Paying attention to our bodies. Noticing sensations in the bodies. We're so busy being in our heads that when I talk to patients or clients, I call them clients, when I talk to them and I'll say to them, what's going on in your body right now? They look at me like I'm crazy, because they're in their heads. They're in their thoughts. And this is what
asked them that.
Yeah, and psychology, even I'm embarrassed about my own field, because my own field is so preoccupied with emotions being like thoughts, your thoughts about your feelings, not really owning that your whole body is part of the equation. And like you said, until we unplug from our devices and pay attention to our bodies, we're not really going to get the information that those core emotions are giving us about what's not working for us in our lives. Emotions give
that. I blame emotions. Feelings are the reason we do or don't do something. It is feelings. But we're not taught that. I think Western medicine did a huge disservice by separating brain and body. They're not separate. 2022 memo, they're not separate. We're getting information all the time. And I coach a lot of surgeons, and I joke that surgeons' only feeling is tight.
So when you say tight, what is that for surgical stuff? What do they mean by tight?
Well, tight in the body.
Tight in the body?
We're mostly just tight.
Oh,
tight in the body.
Tight in the
and
body.
When you're tight in the body, you're usually not having good sex. Yeah, tight. I feel tight.
Tight.
Off. You're trying to protect.
Oh, are these surgeons telling you about how they're feeling?
Yeah, well, they don't know any feeling words. We start happy, sad. But I start with saying most surgeons just feel tight, because identifying your feelings is considered soft instead of a super. Right?
So you're trained to be a super person.
Yeah. Well, you don't have feelings. No. Mm-mm.
Yeah.
We train them out of you if you did.
Years ago, I did a training with John Kabat-Zinn, who's the guy who brought the Maven mindfulness to the medical community. It was all doctors and some psychologists. And after people sat in meditation, so many of the doctors broke down crying.
Doctors are traumatized.
Crying.
Doctors are traumatized people. Our training is incredibly traumatizing. We see the worst of the worst every single day, and then we pick it up and we do it again the next day.
I give you a lot of credit to be able to go into the operating room and have somebody's literal life in your hands.
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of it. Like, you have to function, right? Like, you have to fix the body. But like, we're not taught how to process that. We're not taught how we hang on to that. We're not taught how we then give that to our families and perpetuate the trauma. Like, the medical training is traumatizing. And then we feel broken because we don't want to have sex. And how is this possibly related? Like, it's all related.
But when you think
and I don't
about
just mean doctors, like nurses too, like PAs.
Oh God,
everybody, social workers, all these people who see this stuff every single day, and then they're like, "What do I do about my pleasure and my sex?" And you're like, "It's all related. We got to learn how to feel our feelings so we can process that." And this is, why I'm now like deep diving into trauma and Gabor Mate and all this wonderful stuff, is because all this trauma stuff, it absolutely affects your sex life.
And it's really, life is trauma. Life is trauma. And when we recognize, all the big trauma people who I do trainings with talk about the body. The body keeps score. Bessel van de Kolk, if I'm pronouncing his name. But, if I go back to talk about psychology, if you go way, way back, Darwin got it. He talked about the continuity of emotion in man and animals. And then psychology basically just wrote off that anything subcortical, anything below the reason, what we call the reasoning mind. The reasoning mind can't reason without emotion. Mm-hmm. And it's so sad to me, because I've looked at it on my own journey of having panic attacks and anxiety. When I spoke to my therapist the first time, when you get over being angry with your mother, then you'll be fine. They didn't understand, and they didn't really do the work to understand that there's so much that goes on in your body. And some people just have a kind of wiring where they're more predisposed to having things like panic attacks or depression. And of course, our early childhood environments can actually turn on those genes or dial down those genes. But without working with the body, and being able to get into that place, like you said, of being like in your body and kind of calming your body, you can't listen into the emotions in your body, which give you good information. And you can't work with those emotions, and you can't kind of like take good care of yourself. Having that connection with your own emotional system in your body allows you to be exquisite in your self-care, like really knowing, do I need to go for a walk? Do I need to take a bath? Do I need to take a run? Do I need to feed myself? Do I need to tell somebody something isn't working for me? It's such important information.
Yeah, 100%. I'm blanking on her name now. She's a psychotherapist. She's 90-something, World War II. You know what I'm talking about? She wrote The Gift and...
Oh, God, if I don't... I have to look her up.
Fantastic. We'll look her up. Sorry, people. But she talks about this, and she says, you need to be your own mommy. You need to be your mommy.
Exactly. And when I do a lot of couples work, and people expect their partners to make them feel safe and to make them feel wanted and all of that. And when people make progress, they realize that by being their own good parent, they can supply a lot of those really good sort of relationship with themselves. And then they can be a much better partner and also take stands for what they need and want from their partners.
Yes, and I think, going back to, you're like, we don't feel safe. How do we feel safe? Like, I think this is a key part of it, of like loving yourself, parenting yourself, knowing what you need, knowing what's a hell yes and what's a hell no. That's creating within you that safety that nobody else can give you, right? Edith Edgar is her name, and she wrote The Gift.
I have to read that. Thank you. Thank you.
Amazing.
And on that emotional note, for me, my work as a psychotherapist became incredibly easier because, I hear all day people stress their trauma. I hear stories that can make your hair curl. And what I've learned that's made it so much easier for me to work with people, and I think effectively, is I know it's not my job to fix them. It's not my job to change their feelings. It's my job to stay present, to listen into their feelings in a way they can hear themselves more deeply. They can tolerate those emotions in their body and what goes on in their heads enough where those emotions can peak and release. So I get to feel it with them.
We need to tell and I just want to contrast that with Western medical practice, because doctors, our job is to fix things. We need to fix you. How do I fix you? In 10 minutes or less, so probably a drug, right? And then what does the patient think? The patient thinks the solution is in the doctor. The doctor is going to fix me, right? They lose their agency. So we've got doctors taking on the burden of needing to fix this situation, and patients taking on the burden of I don't know the answer, the doctor does. Right, and we're like, well, no wonder why we're not figuring this out very well. There's other ways to do this. The Western medicine's very good at fixing some things. Like, we're great at femur fractures and taking out cancer. Like, very good at
infectious diseases.
Great at infectious diseases.
The rest of it is really like maintenance, right? And when people own their own bodies, they feel their own bodies, I think what happens is they can make those lifestyle changes because they feel better. It feels good when you eat healthy things that taste good and are good for you. When you're in touch with your body, eating a bag of Doritos afterwards does not feel so good. Where when you really, and what is better healthy hedonism than consensual sexual fun with a partner? Or even with yourself?
Well, I think going back to fun in general, of like, people forget, it's this whole like, I don't want to date my spouse sort of like, entitlement of like, have fun with them. Have fun. Like, studies have shown the more fun you have with your partner, the better sex life you have. Right, whether that's dancing or going bowling or taking a roller coaster ride, get your endorphins up together. Like, there's so much data that shows the more fun you guys have together, it translates into the bedroom. But if you're just using each other as like, child care and house maintenance, it gets a little dull.
I saw that in your book. And actually last night I was sitting there having a conversation with my husband, and it was like, I realized it's so funny. It's ironic. I am somebody who's suffered a lot from anhedonia, the inability to have pleasure as a result of having so much anxiety. When you have a lot of anxiety, you feel less open to pleasure, and then not having pleasure makes you more anxious. And I realized that kind of across the board, what I am doing is I'm coaching clients how to have more pleasure. And the restorative, the benefits of positive affective states, what we're talking about is the care state, which is powered by our own internal opioids, which makes us feel well-being. The dopamine, the seeking system, gets us enthusiastic. And when we then realize how important it is to play, that when we can get playful, as long as we can feel safe, the play system in animals and people turn off if we don't feel safe. If we can become playful, those positive states help the prefrontal cortex in the emotional system begin to shift into new emotional habits. So people like Jaak Panksepp, who is my mentor and idol, unfortunately he's no longer with us. He's the guy who mapped out the circuitry of the mammalian emotional brain. And even chickens have some of those circuits. Like, what he did was he's like going to be the next Darwin. And people don't recognize how important that the pleasure signal is for learning, for us being able to regulate our lives, to be able to have the kind of ability to access those positive states, like, playfulness, care, searching for things, and also being able to tap into lust here and there. That's actually very healing of our trauma. So rather than focus on the negative states, which Lord knows we have them and we can listen into them and discharge them, we need to be able to train ourselves to be able to recognize the emotions in our bodies and start looking at and looking for how we can create the outcomes that we would like to create, to have more fun with ourselves, more fun with our partners. And I think if we think about sex as a much bigger thing than genitals and friction, if we think about it as being play, exploring and play with partners, and it doesn't have to look any way, it would be a lot more fun. And I think, we would have a lot more sex as the end result.
Yeah, I mean, I think, this whole low desire, we'll call it low desire epidemic, but like this, I'm like, you guys, this is a wake-up call about your life and how you want to live your life. I was doing coaching and they were like, but what do you do when there's still dishes in the sink? And I was like, are you realizing you're living your life concerned about dishes in the sink? And I'm not saying like, let your house fall apart, but like, if you can't do anything fun because there's dishes in the sink, maybe use that as an opportunity to like, how am I choosing to live this life? And am I taking the dishes in the sink way too seriously over enjoyment and pleasure and relaxation, right? Like they're almost just stuck in the cortisol sympathetic and they don't see it.
And what that cortisol and stress does is it just reinforces the habits, these neuronal pathways that keep people habit ridden. And what they're focusing on and what they're doing is a big habit loop, as opposed to like getting, okay, here I am in the now. What's cool in the now? Being in the now is where all the fun stuff is, at least some of the time. And we could be in the now some of the time.
We're very entitled to like have amazing sex, but like have a shitty overall like work-life balance and mindset and health. And like health of our body and our mind is highly correlated with a happy sex life. Like it's hard to have one without the other ones, right? And so like, I saw a woman with low desire and it's like, she was not having a healthy lifestyle, very high stress, lots of chronic medical conditions. And it's like, it explains it, not like, oh, well, let's fix your sex drive in spite of all this other stuff that, we've decided not to try to do anything about.
It's just a symptom of the lifestyle issues that we have, that we were being hijacked by this high stress, high, attention pulling lifestyle. And we're so hijacked, and that I just think it's incredible that you took the time to listen and ask your patients to be an askable doctor and to have these kinds of conversation that go beyond, I guess, what the average sort of check-in for a urologist is.
Well, yeah, I mean, you just hear things enough times in a row, and you pick up. I guess I'm a researcher ultimately. It's like you pick up patterns, right? And then you just start asking questions about the patterns that you see, and you're like, what's happening? Who's taking care of these people? Why is everybody's sex life shitty? And starting to get into it. But like, to tell you the truth, I'm in a very traditional medical practice. I have 10 minutes, right, with people. Like, that is not the time to figure all this stuff out. You need to read, you need to podcast, you need to start paying attention to your life. Like, you need a dialogue. And so, like, to me, I'm like, it's actually not my favorite thing to talk to a woman about low desire in a 10-minute clinic visit because it's a huge topic, right? So it's like, come to me after you've read the book, after you've listened to the podcast, after you've started, and I'm happy to help. But if they come in just thinking like there's a pill or there's like a light switch, it's like, no, you're going to be disappointed because it's not. And that's why I love this topic, because I can talk about this for the rest of my life. It's so freaking big, right? But in a 10-minute solve my problem right now, doctor, it's actually very dissatisfying. Does that make sense?
Completely makes sense. And I think what we're really talking about, Kelly, is that it's not really about fixing the sex drive. It's really about understanding what's not working in the person's life, where they're just not having access to what I call the pleasure drive. We want to get up in the morning and have the idea that something and some things or some practices or something in our lives are going to personally give us pleasure, even outside of our roles as mothers, grandparents, partners, physicians, that we in particular as women, because we work harder in and out of the house in general than men. And I'm sorry, that's just the reality of it,
That's right.
that
That's
we,
data.
that's data. We can argue all day long about how it should be. That how something should be is not as a researchable question. It's how can we begin to prioritize pleasure, which is in our puritanical culture a dirty word, in particular when it's applied to women and sex.
Yeah, and I think, people take a very passive view of this, of like, well, maybe someday something will be pleasurable to me. Is like, you have to go figure it out. And I think the role of creativity and like creating something in your life, whether that's creating a podcast or creating art or creating dance or just writing, right? The role of creativity in figuring out, I like to do this and it makes me feel good, is kind of a parallel to like sexual activity, right? Of like, I like to do it. It makes me feel good. That's important in my life because that actually makes me want to get up in the morning.
And the more that somebody focuses on that, the more that they can train. As a neuroscientist, I got to tell you that attention is everything. Where we put our attention, and people who are anxious like me or depressed, we tend to look at things that are either threatening or things that may, like, oh my God, what will happen? We'll drop the ball. Like, we worry a lot. And there's, the worry is a good thing to a certain point. And we can, by what we put attention on, we can actually change the structures and the functions of many areas of the brain. So training ourselves to focus on the body is going to have an impact on the brain. Focusing on pleasure and what's going to feel good and be good for us. It's going to, and Jaak Panksepp, who's that neuroscientist, he wrote about this presciently, that therapies are going to be more about focusing on positive, on creating positive and pleasant, happy emotional experiences. So what I do with my clients is I give them, most of them, what's called the affective neuroscience personality scales. It's an online thing that they can take that gives us a little snapshot of the core, like, sort of systems, the defensive systems, fear, rage, and then panic. With the panic system is what gets triggered when we're worried about like a loss of a resource, or when we're worried about a relationship. And then the seeking system, which gets hijacked by how we're using our attention, works with all the other systems. And then we have the affiliative systems, care, powered by the opioids that we create, joy, play, which is social joy that gets so tamped down in adulthood. And then the lust, but they don't measure lust on that scale because they were afraid if they asked people about lust, it would contaminate the other questions. But when people see how sometimes out of whack their core emotional systems are, usually in the direction of the defensiveness, either fear, panic, grief, or the rage system is kind of higher than you'd want. If you can't feel safe, and when those defenses are triggered, even rage, you're not feeling safe. And if you're not feeling safe, you're not balanced, and you're walking around like a cortisol time bomb. So this, just understanding something's out of balance without like making it pathological. It's like, oh, let's go to the gym. Let's pay attention to our bodies. Let's harness our breath. Let's harness our attention. And, for me, it works pretty good most of the time because as someone who had that, panic wiring, where I used to have, like, I would say basically, I could have absolutely performance anxiety in a room by myself. That's how anxious I used to get, like even thinking about talking. That working on my nervous system over time, being in my body, and like you said, yoga, harnessing the breath, all sorts of things that most of the time I can be way more curious than afraid, and I can have way more fun in everyday life and in my work. What's more fun than this?
And I think
having this conversation.
This is the most fun. Oh my gosh, we have 3 minutes left. I can't. I think the role of awareness, right? Like, because we're not, and this is exactly what you're saying, but like if you're not aware of how your body is in the present moment, right? Like, let's say you come home and you're busy and you're cortisol, and then your spouse is like, let's have sex. And you're like, well, and now I feel super broken. Instead of the awareness of like, hey, I just worked 10 hours and then put the kids to bed. I'm in a stressed out, like just the awareness of it to understand why sex isn't a safe, pleasurable thing for you right now. You're not broken. You're exactly as you should be in this situation. Let's not add the extra like weight of like, of like, it's just awareness that'll get us like, oh, right now I'm not in that state. Now, what do I need to get in that state? And maybe that's not going to happen today. Maybe it's going to happen this weekend. Maybe it's going to happen when I set some time aside for it.
And this is a great question, because a great point, because then we might be able to feel entitled enough to say to our partners, you know what I really need and want right now? I'd like to talk with you about my day, or I'd like you to hold me, or I'd like to look at you and hear about your day, like connection, to be able to really feel connected.
I'd like you to make me a cup of tea, please.
Cup of tea. I'd like you to...
Especially for women, like we need to take care of ourselves, but we need to be asked to be cared for, because it's not default happening, people. People aren't just like, let's take care of that adult woman.
Research shows that a very important relationship skill, it's really important, is asking for what we need and what we want, not expecting people to read our minds, and asking it over and over again without making it a big deal that we need to ask. If we don't ask, we're creating a relationship offense.
Oh, that is a perfect thing to end on. Take that one home, folks. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to do it again because this is super fun.
There's so much more to talk about. And thank you for all of your work, and have a wonderful day.